Hope arrives before explanation and often before evidence is available. It hooks into the part of the mind that prefers possibility over resignation. This feeling can feel both reckless and sacred at the same time. If you have ever clung to a small light in darkness, then you have known the shape of hope. This video will examine hope not as mere sentiment or cliché, but as a structured human response. We will consider what it means to expect, to risk, and to stay grounded while remaining open. Philosophers have argued about hope for centuries across different cultures and traditions. Some treat hope as a virtue worthy of cultivation, while others warn of its capacity to delude. The debate hinges on whether hope connects us to truth or distracts us from reality. We will begin by defining hope clearly and carefully, distinguishing it from related emotions. This clarification will help us see when hope helps and when it harms. The goal is to hold hope without losing sight of facts and consequences. In philosophical terms, hope is often framed as a forward-looking intentional mental state. It involves a desire for a possible outcome paired with a belief in its plausibility. This dual structure distinguishes hope from mere yearning or idle wishing. Ancient thinkers like Aristotle and later Christian theologians treated hope as a moral disposition intertwined with courage. The Stoics approached hope with suspicion because unchecked hope could disrupt rational acceptance. These historical tensions still shape how we speak about hope today. Expectation is the intellectual cousin of hope, but it behaves differently under scrutiny. Expectations tend to be probabilistic, drawing on evidence and past patterns to predict outcomes. Hope, by contrast, tolerates lower probabilities and carries an emotional charge that expectation lacks. When expectation and hope align, we feel steady and instrumentally capable of planning ahead. When they diverge, we must decide whether to revise beliefs or to keep hope alive in the face of slim odds. That choice is where practical wisdom enters the picture. To hope wisely means to navigate between blind optimism and paralytic pessimism with skill. Wise hope preserves motivation while respecting evidence and constraints. It creates a bridge between imagination and action rather than a detour into denial. This form of hope requires constant calibration through inquiry and feedback, adapting as new information arrives. It is less dramatic than hope portrayed in movies, but it is far more sustainable over a lifetime. We will explore practical habits that cultivate this balanced approach. Wishful thinking is hope without epistemic restraint, and it often leads to disappointment. Wishful thinking ignores probability and treats desire as sufficient evidence for truth. It thrives in anxieties and ambiguous circumstances, where ambiguity becomes an invitation for fantasy. Distinguishing wishful thinking from constructive hope involves testing beliefs against reality and inviting dissenting perspectives. When others can respectfully poke holes in our assumptions, our hope becomes resilient rather than brittle. This process requires humility and social trust. Hope plays a central role during hardship by preserving the motivational spark that sustains action. People facing prolonged crises often credit hope with keeping them committed to incremental efforts. This is not mere romanticism, but a psychological truth about human endurance. However, hope used as an escape can prevent necessary coping and restructuring, prolonging harm. The challenge is to use hope as a scaffold for change rather than as a blindfold from reality. That distinction separates survival from self-deception. Modern psychology gives us tools to understand how hope works inside the brain and mind. Studies link hopeful thinking to goal-oriented planning, agency beliefs, and adaptive coping strategies. The neural architecture supports both optimism and analytical caution in different contexts. These findings suggest that hope is a skill to practice, not merely a temperamental gift. Like any skill, it benefits from repetition, feedback, and gradual complexity. We can design daily routines that strengthen hopeful capacities without ignoring reality. Philosophers like Kierkegaard and Pascal engaged with hope as a religious and existential experience. Kierkegaard saw hope as an existential stance oriented toward possibility and faith. Pascal warned that human hearts misplace hope when they seek consolation in illusions rather than in truth. These thinkers push us to ask whether hope should be grounded in metaphysical conviction or pragmatic reasoning. Their provocations remain relevant because our sources of hope today range from science to spirituality. We must decide which foundations sustain our lives and why. Expectation often comes with plans, timelines, and measurable outcomes that anchor our decisions. When expectations are realistic, they motivate effective behavior through predictable steps. Yet rigid expectation can also become brittle when environments shift unpredictably. Adaptive hope respects changing circumstances and updates predictions accordingly, without surrendering motivation. This adaptive stance treats expectation as hypothesis and hope as the energy to test it. It is an iterative dance between belief and evidence. One of the clearest ways to hope wisely is to adopt small experiments instead of grand promises. Experiments let us pursue possibility while preserving accountability to facts. Each small test reveals feedback that either strengthens or redirects our hopeful commitments. This experimental posture reduces the cost of being wrong and increases the chance of learning rapidly from setbacks. Over time, a series of small experiments creates a compound effect that majorizes passive dreaming. This is practical philosophy applied to everyday life. Hope is communal as much as it is individual, and communities amplify or dampen hopeful possibilities. Shared narratives bind people to collective goals that feel achievable together. When communities model transparency and humility, hope becomes a public resource rather than private fantasy. Conversely, communities insulated from contradictory information can escalate collective wishful thinking into shared denial. Building communal structures that welcome critical reflection while preserving morale is difficult but essential. This social architecture shapes whether hope produces flourishing or fragility. Hope without an ethic of responsibility risks becoming selfish or passive, and that is a common hazard. True hope often implies obligations to act in ways that make the preferred outcome more probable. Ethical hope requires we consider consequences beyond our private desires. Cultivating hope thus includes asking what actions will make desired outcomes more likely for everyone. It also requires accepting trade-offs and sometimes temporary sacrifices for more durable results. This moral dimension makes hope less trivial and more transformative. A practical checklist for cultivating wise hope begins with reality checking our assumptions honestly. We then clarify what outcomes are possible, probable, and desirable under current constraints. Finally, we identify small, actionable steps that incrementally improve odds while measuring progress, honestly. Adding rituals like daily reflection, journaling, and seeking disconfirming evidence strengthens this approach further. Rituals consolidate intention and anchor hope in discipline rather than mood alone. They convert abstract possibility into repeatable habits with cumulative impact. Hope interacts with time in complicated ways because futures are uncertain and often lopsided. Long-term hope requires patience and tolerance for delayed returns, but it also requires periodic reassessment. Without reassessment, long-term hope can calcify into stubbornness or cruelty to oneself. Term hope calls for quick learning and adaptive pivots, and both timeframes deserve different practices. Balancing these temporal orientations is a core competency for living well in uncertain worlds. It reduces the emotional whiplash between immediate disappointment and distant aspiration. Neuroscience suggests that hope engages motivational circuits and reward anticipation in ways that scaffold effort. Dopaminergic pathways reinforce actions that promise improvement, which is why hope often correlates with persistence. But the same circuits can also be hijacked by unrealistic optimism or gambling urges. Understanding this biology helps us design environments and habits that channel hope productively rather than destructively. It recommends moderation, accountability, and environmental nudges that reward iterative progress. Biology does not determine destiny, but it offers useful constraints for wise practice. History offers many stories where hope shaped outcomes in unpredictable ways, for better or worse. Social movements, scientific breakthroughs, and personal recoveries often began with a committed band of hopeful actors testing improbable ideas. History therefore shows hope as a causal force when paired with strategy. But history also warns about utopian projects that mistook fervor for feasibility and caused harm. Learning from history requires humility, skepticism, and a willingness to reorient. That balance between courage and caution is the hallmark of practical historical wisdom. Hope and grief often coexist in the same chest, and that duality deserves recognition. Grief reframes expectations and creates space for new forms of hope that are calibrated to changed realities. This coexistence is not contradictory but generative, allowing continuity amid loss. Learning to hold grief and hope together teaches emotional sophistication and resilience. It prevents denial while preserving the motivational energy that grief can otherwise extinguish. This integration is critical for navigating life's inevitable transitions with dignity. Practically speaking, building a reliable hope practice involves setting realistic intermediate goals and celebrating small wins. These milestones create feedback loops that sustain motivation and inform adjustments. Celebrating responsibly means acknowledging progress without inflating likelihoods beyond reason. Pair celebrations with honest debriefing about what worked and what failed to preserve learning. This twin practice of praise and inquiry converts hopeful action into effective strategy. Over time, a disciplined hope practice compounds into durable competence. When institutions foster hope responsibly, social outcomes improve through better public trust and cooperation. Policies that combine aspirational goals with measurable accountability inspire broad participation. Conversely, institutions that promise miracles without transparency erode faith and produce cynicism instead of hope. Designing institutions for wise hope means embedding evaluation, learning, and community voice into governance practices. These mechanisms prevent grandiosity and preserve realism while keeping collective aspiration alive. Institutional design, therefore, becomes an ethical project for hope. Technology amplifies both the possibilities and perils of hope because it can magnify expectations rapidly. Social media can spread narratives of hope quickly, but it can also accelerate disappointment and comparison. Technology, therefore, demands new literacies for discerning realistic possibilities from sensational claims. Wise hope in technological societies requires information hygiene and community-based verification practices. We must learn to weigh algorithmic promises against social risks and personal limits. This is part of practicing hope in a digitally mediated world. A personal confession, cultivating hope wisely requires ongoing practice and occasional humility. Even the best-intentioned plans can fail, and that is part of living with open eyes. Accepting failure as data rather than identity preserves hope without making it poisonous. This humility allows us to engage with possibility after setbacks and to rebuild expectations on firmer ground. The alternative is brittle hope that shatters at first disappointment and leaves us without resources for recovery. Practice keeps the heart and mind aligned. In the end, hope is a philosophy of engaged possibility that requires moral seriousness. It asks us to be architects of the future rather than passive recipients of fate. When hope is paired with judgment, accountability, and action, it becomes an ethical force for sustainable change. So here is the philosophical twist. Hope is both a personal state and a public responsibility we collectively shape. If this perspective changed how you think about possibility, subscribe for more essays that blend history, ethics, and practical wisdom.